As you know, the 24 Hours of Lemons is an endurance road racing series for cars costing $500 or less, not including the safety equipment.
And you may be asking yourself, are there some cars that are just so amazing that the Lemons judges will overlook the budget just because we want to see these cars on a racetrack?
Well, yes.
Yeah, and one of the cars on that list, really near the top of that list, is the Hudson Hornet.
We've only seen one Hudson Hornet in Lemons, this 1952 model from Team Chase Race in Washington State, who also run a fab shop if you need a roll cage built.
Now, in general, for the Hudson Hornet, racing is nothing new. In the early 1950s, the Hornet was campaigned by numerous stock car drivers using the famous Fabulous Hudson Hornet livery. The Hornet had lots of success in stock car racing, thanks in large part to its step-down chassis.
The Hornet had a separate ladder frame, but the body and floor pans were actually below the main frame rails instead of sitting on top like most cars that it was competing against. This gave it lower center of gravity and better handling.
Now, this was especially important for the Hornet because instead of the V8 engine that a lot of its competition had, it had a flathead inline six. It was a 308 cubic inch engine with dual carbs, which they called twin H power, so it wasn't bad, but it wasn't a V8.
Now, this is something we talk about frequently in Lemons. It is often the case that less power and better handling performs better than going out and getting a big old V8 and thinking you're going to dominate everybody else, but instead...
After all that 50s racing success, the Fabulous Hudson Hornet made a return as Doc Hudson in the Pixar movie Cars, and that introduced the Hudson Hornet to an entirely new generation of fans that probably don't remember 1950s NASCAR legends like Marshall Teague and Smokey Yunick.
Nick, I don't think we can talk about Disney properties anymore. You might want to... I don't know. We'll have to fix this one.
The Fabulous Hudson Hornet made a return as
Physician Hudspell in the animated movie film Automobiles.
That'll keep the Disney lawyers off our back.
Chase Race's Hornet, like many Lemons cars, is really a 50 or 150 footer and was built out of a couple different cars. They started with a rusted out 51 they'd found in Nebraska, and they took all the mechanical bits from that car and slapped them onto a bare shell that they had scored on eBay Motors.
Yeah, and as it turns out, the shell was one of only a few things they purchased on the internet. The team captain tells us that most Hudson parts are obtained by looking for phone numbers in the Hudson Club newsletter, then calling a random old guy, and if that old guy doesn't have what you need, he'll give you the phone number of a different old guy. And once you find an old guy that has what you want, you mail that old guy a check.
Due to the complications of acquiring parts, as we just outlined, the modifications to this Hornet are fairly minimal. Front suspension is completely stock with a couple of the coils cut off, and the sway bar from a Jeep, as you do, and rear suspension is the stock leaf spring with lowering blocks. Front brakes have been converted to 4 discs with GM calipers, and the rear brakes are the stock drums, wheels 15x7s from a trailer, and the tires are extra comfy 225/70 15s, but according to the team captain, anyone who's actually criticizing a car for handling like a boat is overlooking the fact that boats are actually kind of fun to drive.
The team has run this car with both their own vintage-inspired racing livery and the Doc Hudson scheme, both of which look fabulous on track. The car features the famous twin H-Power Flathead 6 with dual single-barrel downdraft carbs, paired with a 4-speed automatic, and that combo has taken the team to 3 successfully completed Lemons races at the Ridge Motorsports Park outside of Olympia, Washington.
Their finishing positions didn't quite match the success of Marshall Teague in 1952. Hell, they didn't even match the success of Fonty Flock. But in those 3 Lemons races, Chase Race finished 42nd, 55th, and 58th, although to be fair, none of those were last place finishes, and they beat several BMWs, Audis, and Mustangs, and a Peugeot 505.
That's not nothing.
So, the Chase race car is the only Hudson Hornet we've seen in Lemons to date. But we have seen a second Hudson, this 1950 Hudson Pacemaker from New Jersey's Cynical Racing, who compete in Lemons East region. Now, the Pacemaker was a slightly smaller and cheaper alternative to the Hornet.
This car didn't come from eBay or a field. Cynical Racing found it in a museum, and it is a perfect replica of Mario Andretti's first ever race car. The museum was ready to get rid of it for whatever reason.
We gotta get rid of this thing.
And Cynical Racing, who'd been around for a few years at this point, knew a real Lemons car when they saw it. So they snagged it, they re-engineered the cage, and got special permission from us to run cycle-style fenders on it and brought it to Lemons. And that's pretty much it. It's got the stock twin-H engine, it's got a 3 on the tree column-shifted transmission, and the stock suspension.
These 2 Hudsons are the only 2 Hudsons we've seen in Lemons racing yet. But despite that, they've both won the grand prize in the series, which is called the Index of Effluency, and it essentially goes to the team that has the most success with the least likely machine. So they're 2 for 2, and that makes them one of only a couple of manufacturers in Lemons with a perfect Index of Effluency record.
If racing a Hudson in Lemons seems too lofty a goal for your team, well, instead of the Fabulous Hudson Hornet, there's always the Adequate Willys Aerolark. Why adequate? Well, it also has a flathead 6-cylinder engine, a column-shifted transmission, and also a perfect Index of Effluency record.
There you have it, a blueprint for Lemons domination. Bring an orphaned American car like a Hudson Hornet and win the grand prize. And you can do it with something else. We've still never had a Kaiser, Packard, or even a DeSoto. So here's your chance.
Every second you don't subscribe or watch one of these videos, another Vega is sent to the crusher. Won't you help us save Classic?